Professional portraits aren't that hard to get. Using a software like Luminar Neo really does make it easy, and that's what we're going to look at today in this tutorial. Now you're going to want to stick around to the end because I'm going to give you a bonus tip to really elevate your portrait photography and take it to the next level. Now let's dive in. So here we are inside of Luminar Neo, and now it's time to get to editing. And the very first thing that I like to do is get my basic adjustments. This is a great starting point for every single image, regardless of if it's a portrait or landscape or anything else. You should always get your basic adjustments set the way that you want them to be. And when I say basic adjustments, what I'm talking about is exposure, contrast, and doing anything that is a raw edit. And this also applies for JPEG images. So what we're going to do is click on Essentials. And this gives me a list of all of the essential tools. And the first one that I want to start with is Develop Raw. The reason I want to start here is because once I make this change, everything else is going to build on top of it. So if I click this, you'll notice that I get a panel of options available to me. Now, if you are on a subscription version of Luminar Neo, or if you buy the Creative Pass, or the annual pass, I should say, then what you'll be able to see is the auto adjust. Now, I personally don't use the auto adjust that often, but for the sake of today's tutorial, I'm going to use it just to see what we get. So I'm going to click it. And what this is doing is it's bringing up all of the tones to what Luminar thinks is the best. Now, for me, because it doesn't have my creative vision in mind, I know that I wanted a more contrasty image. So let's go ahead and take a look at the adjustments that it made. The good news is most of the adjustments that are made with the auto are going to be contained in the light section. So all I need to do is, in this case, I think it opened up the shadows way too much because I don't want to see this backdrop. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull those shadows back down. And I'm getting somewhere more into the atmosphere of what I like. Now, you'll notice that I'm getting these blue indicators on the image. That means that I'm clipping my pure blacks. So if I were to print this onto paper, the printer would just put a whole bunch of black into that area. Now, this is really only an issue when you are either entering a photo contest or you're printing on paper. If you're uploading to social media, it's not that big of a deal. So I usually don't worry about clipping this much black. Now, if for any reason I get about that much black, that doesn't look very good. So if I turn off that indicator, you can see the image is just really, really overexposed, or underexposed, I should say. I'm just going to undo that so that way we can get back to where we were, because this is probably safe for what I would work with. And I may even pull down on the shadows just a little bit more. I think that I can bring back some of the highlights because this image, when it was shot, it wasn't actually terribly overexposed, or a lot of the information was not actually touching the far right side of the histogram. And don't worry if you don't fully understand the histogram at this point. Just know that if I had information, which the information is this line of colors, if I had information touching the far right like that, then I start to get these red indicators. But when this image was shot, that was not the case. So I don't have to worry about it. All right. Now, let's take a look at where we are. This is before, and this is after the AI auto, and then me correcting a few things. Now, one of the tools that I really enjoy using for basic adjustments is Smart Contrast. And this is really going to help make your photos pop. This is like that first step to getting your photos to pop. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull this over just a little bit. And you don't need a whole lot. If there's anything that makes sense in Luminar Neo, is a little goes a long way on most of the sliders. All right. So the last thing that I'll do here is I'll come over to my camera profiles. Now, you're only going to get this option if you shot in RAW. This is a Canon raw file. It's a CR2 file. So I do get this option. And what this is going to do is it tells Luminar how to render the raw image and the information that's being presented to Luminar. So by using the down arrows, I can just kind of cycle through here and figure out what makes the most sense. Let me turn off my clipping indicators because I think I'm getting some crazy overlays here. Yeah, not sure why those all turned out red, but I do like camera neutral. And this is one of those things that if you really want to take the flat colors from your raw image after you get it into Luminar and make it pop, this is one of those places where I can't stress enough, you should at least experiment with the camera profiles. So just cycling through here, some of those are not actually working well on this image, and I'm not sure why, but that's okay because there's plenty that are. And I think camera portrait is actually working really well. So I'm going to go ahead and hit return, and that's going to allow me to select it. I'll just go ahead and click it with the mouse. If I hold the backslash key and let it go, you can see where we've gone so far. And I think that this is working quite well. I like what we have. So I'll call this good with my develop raw. I'm going to go ahead and click on develop. It's going to close it. The next thing that I want to do is get rid of this little doohickey that's over here on the far left. So I'm going to use the eraser tool that's located right underneath develop raw. And all this requires me to do is paint over it. Anything that's in red is going to get selected and removed. So I'll come over, I'll click on erase, and we'll let Luminar think itself through here in a little bit. And down at the bottom, let me go ahead and paint again because it didn't get it all. And sometimes the eraser tool does require you to go over it a few times, and that's okay. Like, there's no AI credits that are a part of this. And then once it's done, and we're good to go. So let's go ahead and close our eraser tool and zoom back out. So here's the before, and here is where we've gotten to so far. Now, if I wanted to, I could also clean up this area here, but I'm not overly concerned about that. I think that this is going to be just fine for our final look. And if need be, I can crop in a little bit more as well. I'm not going to go over every tool that's here in the portrait category. Instead, my recommendation is that you download a trial if you don't already have Luminar Neo. And if you want to pick up Luminar Neo and save a little bit of money, consider using my coupon code that's popping up here on the screen now. You can also find it in the description box. I do make a small commission, but that's at no extra charge to you, and it's a great way of supporting this channel, and I thank everyone who uses it. If you do have Luminar Neo already, well, you can go ahead and follow along with your own image as we go through these portrait edits. Let's go ahead and get started with the portrait editing tools inside of Luminar. The first one that I'm going to activate for this image is Face AI. When we activate this, what it's going to do is look for the face, and it's going to give us a few tools here. The first one is going to be face light, and all that is just brightening up the face. Either you can go really bright, or you can just go just a little bit brighter. And then by hitting this little eyeball on any of these filters, it'll turn off that filter and then turn it back on, and you can kind of see what's happening. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on her face here just a little bit. I normally don't recommend this, but because YouTube's compression may not always show the minute changes that I'm making, I just want to make sure that you can see it. So that's the reason why. So if I turn this off and turn it back on, you can see that hopefully a little bit better. But for the sake of making sure that it's visible, I'm going to pull up on the face light to about 49%. And then if I turn that off and turn it back on, you can see it just makes everything on her face that much brighter. You got to be careful with this though, because it could end up clipping her face. So if you're going to print these, like especially if you're working on like a family session or something of that sort, you're going to want to make sure that you pay attention to what's happening with the red indicators, because unlike the black indicators, which will probably be just fine if you print that, if you have a bunch of red little specks all over your image, what's going to end up happening is you're not going to get any ink on the paper in that area, and it looks really, really bad. Ask me how I know. This guy did it. All right. So make sure that you're paying attention to your indicators for clipping. But if it's going on social, don't worry about it, because dead pixels don't really matter when you're on social media. All right. Sorry. Didn't mean to zoom out there. We're going to zoom back in. But again, for YouTube, I'm just going to go ahead and crank this up somewhere around 49. And I think that that's going to be great for just adding light into the face. If I hit this little eyeball, it's going to turn it off and turn it back on. And, you know, that's what it does there. All right. The next piece here is a very controversial piece. And I have a very small dog in the fight. All right. And what I'll say is, whenever you're working with portraits and you're trying to represent a person, the image should look like that person when it is done. So if you overly do some of these tools like slimming of the face, you could end up making the person look like her head is probably not that narrow. So when she starts to see these pictures of herself, or maybe you forget to do it on a photo, it may not come out the way that you would expect, and that could have a negative reaction. I usually leave this tool completely turned off unless I photograph someone using a lens that was very, very heavily distorted. All right. And their face is a little distorted or overly bloated. But other than that, I leave the slim face off. Now, one of my favorite places to work is right here inside of the eyes filter. All right. We're going to leave iris on original for a second. And again, this isn't a deep dive. If you want to deep dive into these Portrait AI tools for Luminar Neo, leave a comment down below and I will make a dedicated video for each of these tools, because I think that they are that important. But what I like to do here is see if I can get some detail out of the eyes. And so the first thing is I'm just going to pull iris flare all the way up, because she does have some nice color in her irises there. And this is one of my favorite tools of editing inside of Luminar Neo for portraits. And then I don't need to enlarge her eyes, but I will pull up on the whites of her eyes. Not too far, right? That looks fake. You don't want your retouches to look obvious that you did any. So around 34 is probably correct for her. Let's go ahead and pull up on the eye enhancer. And what this is doing is, you can see it's just bringing up a little bit more detail into her pupil as well as the iris of her eye. And I do like what I'm getting there. And again, you're not going to be this far zoomed in when you're viewing the image. I'm only zoomed in just to make it easier to see on YouTube. But this is essentially how you would view this edit on a device or on a print. And it may even be smaller. It could be larger in some cases, but most of the time, you're not going to be looking at it like this. All right. So it's always a good idea to zoom out, take a look at the edits over the whole image, hitting the backslash key or holding it down to look at the before and the after, just to make sure that you're not like overdoing it. All right. We want the photos to pop, but we don't want them to be over processed. All right. That's the mark of somebody who doesn't know what they're doing with the tools. And that's okay when you're testing out, but we want to make sure that we're doing the person a service whenever we're going to use these tools. I don't think I need any red eye removal, but dark circle removal. Let me zoom back in here. Just look at underneath her eyes. So we'll just go ahead and pull this up, and sometimes it takes a little bit of time to render. And you'll notice that down at the bottom where the image file name is, you'll see a little circle that's spinning. That's letting you know Luminar Neo is doing some work there. All right. So turning off Face AI and turning it back on, you can see it just opened up a little bit of those dark areas under her eye in a very intelligent way. I enjoy how that works. So we're going to go with that. And then I don't need eyebrow enhance for this photo, so I'm not even going to use it. We'll go ahead and minimize eyes, and then we're going to open up mouth. Now, she does have some teeth showing, and her lips are already pretty well saturated. So I don't think I need to work with that, but this is that area where you could saturate the lips just a little bit more. And that could be helpful with making the whole image pop. You know, like if I pull that down, I think that it's a little overly saturated. Yeah, somewhere around there is probably good. So if I turn this off, turn it back on, it just looks way more natural and it looks like it's her lips. I really do enjoy doing this type of edit. So teeth whitening, you know, don't overdo the teeth whitening thing. I think that teeth whitening is a little overrated. It's good to like make the teeth look a little bit more clean if they're not as clean, but like don't overdo it. That's all I would say. So we can turn this off, turn it back on. And now the face, which is in a portrait, one of the most important areas to get right, looks really good. All right. So if I go ahead and turn off or close out Face AI, I think we're ready to move into Skin AI. So Skin AI is probably one of the easiest tools that you can use. And all you have to do with this tool is pull up on the amount. And I usually pull it up very generous. So somewhere around, 80% at first, just to see what it looks like on the skin. And then I zoom in and I look at all of these areas. In fact, let me show you another trick. So let's go ahead and pull this all the way back down. And the first thing that is always good to do, and I forgot to mention it, is check this box for skin defects removal. So when I check that, you're going to get the little circle down here. And what it's doing is it's looking for things on the face that it can remove, or at least the defects. It did catch our little dots here. So we're going to have to clean that up, but I'll show you how to do that here in a bit. And I'm just going to go ahead and pull up on the amount slider, maybe around 53%. And that's cleaning up the skin quite nicely. Now, what you want to be careful with, at least in my recommendation, is not overdoing skin retouching to the point that the skin doesn't look like skin. I think at 73, this is way too much for the model. If I go ahead and back out and let this re-render, it just looks like her skin doesn't look like skin. And you may like this. This may be helpful for you, but I personally don't like this particular look. I like less processed looking portraits. And I also want to make sure that I'm representing the person. I can't say that enough. Now, I noticed that when I used the skin defects removal, it tried to get rid of these little pearls that are on her cheeks. So what we want to do is come over here to masking, and then we'll just go ahead and grab a brush and we'll click on erase. And I'm just going to use the bracket keys to make it a little bit smaller. And I'm just going to paint over those areas that I don't want this mask to actually impact. And you can see that I'm just bringing back those balls or the pearls, and is working out just fine. So if you ever get something that you don't really like over the entire image, you can erase the edit from those areas just by using the masking icon here. So I was very easily able to recover the things that Luminar thought were skin defects, and I just want to tell Luminar, no, those aren't skin defects. Please leave them alone. They're actually supposed to be there. All right. So we'll call that good, but you'll definitely want to make sure that you take a deeper look throughout your image. Now, what you're probably noticing is I have some areas in the skin that probably still need a little bit more retouching. And this is where coming back through with an eraser tool will really help out. That's located in the essentials. So we'll grab the eraser, and I'm not going to do this for all of these images or all of these spots, but you can literally just come in here, make your brush size about the same size or really a little bit larger than the spot that you want to correct. We'll get this one right here on our cheek as well. And then just hit erase, let Luminar think itself through. And then we're going to see that those spots go away and it's going to be just fine. All right. So that's how I would fix those areas. And I'll do just a few more right up here. And right now I'm just doing single clicks because the brush is large enough to get rid of these blemishes. and this is really working out the way that I want it to. So, or at least the sizing of the brush, and we'll get this little notch right here. There's some imperfections that are a part of the person that won't be too terrible to remove, but you want to try and leave things intact as much as possible. So we'll go ahead and erase this and then let Luminar do its thing. And I think that that's good. So if we turn this off, and it doesn't want to give us a preview, there it is. My computer's just moving a little slow. So this is with the eraser tool that we just painted turned off, and this is with it turned on. I think that this looks pretty good. We'll go ahead and click to zoom back out, look at our entire image, just make sure that we're getting what we want. And here is a before. Let me move my mouse. Here's a before, and here is an after with all of the edits that we have applied. So that's how you can easily edit a portrait using just a few of the tools inside of Luminar Neo, ideally Face AI and Skin AI. But I did promise you a bonus tip or technique. So to do this bonus tip or technique, what you want to do is come over to Essentials, and then we're going to go black and white. And I'm going to convert this to black and white. And you could sit here and, manipulate the colors to be brighter or darker based off of the color response. But I'm not going to worry about that. I just want to show you the tool. So you could do that. Once you have the image converted to black and white, you want to come back to the portrait category and select high key. Now, you'll pull up the amount as much as you want or as little as you want. And I think for this image, we'll probably come somewhere around 49. And I think that this looks pretty good. So if I turn the eye off and turn it on, you can see it's making the brighter areas bright and the darker areas a little bit darker. Now, again, if you plan to print this, make sure that you hit the J key, just so that way you're getting a indicator of what's being clipped. But for this, I'm not planning to print it. This would just go on social. So that is the first step. Now, what you can do is really fine tune this however you want. And what I recommend is pulling down on the standard high key. Somewhere between 25 and 10 is pretty good on most images, especially if the background was already shot pretty dark. And then you come to the dynamic high key and you play around with this to taste. All right. This is going to be very, very dependent on how the image was shot. This was shot with a single light off to camera left or model right. And it was up a little bit higher, coming down and in front of her. All right. And so knowing that, I can see how the light is like falling off on the subject, and it's a very contrasty image to begin with. So if I hit the backslash key, you can see I already have a lot of contrast, but this is really making things bright. Now, because I added that face bright earlier, her face looks way brighter than it needs to. So you want to be careful with modifying that later on, but I'll show you how to correct this here in a bit. And then the next thing I can do is pull down on my blacks. And this is what I call the boomifier, or the thing that makes the whole effect worthwhile. This, I wouldn't call it high key, but I like the contrast that I get. And so if you want something that's going to stand out and look very different than a lot of other edits that are out there on the market, this is one of the ways to do it. Make your image go black and white, and then turn on the high key filter inside a portrait. Now, you could play around with the glow. There is a glow on by default, but if you don't like the glow, then turn it off. And if you want more, then you can like really crank it up. I feel like that's like 90s glam from Sears, not my style. So I'm going to pull that down. And then of course you can contrast this even more. So if you pull down the blacks and then you contrast it even more, you can get like really crazy and edgy. Again, holding that J key down or pressing it just to activate the clipping warnings. And then, you can play around with the contrast here. But This is one of my favorite ways of stylizing an image to give a few different looks. If I go ahead and click here to close the high key, I can come up to edits, and then I can come down here to the face AI, because that's where I increase the brightness on her face. And I can pull down on the face light so that way it's not as aggressive. And then when I close that, come back up here to high key, let Luminar think itself through. It's going to reapply all of those filters that are above the face AI. And now her face is not as bright as it was in the initial edit of adding this. So here is the before, what we came into Luminar Neo with, and here is the after. Now, if you want to learn more about using Luminar Neo, there's two ways that you can do it. The first way is to watch the video that's popping up on screen now. The second way is coming over to my website, signing up for a one-on-one coaching call. If that's something you're interested in, look in the description box down below. Click the link, it'll take you to a calendar, and then you'll be able to sign up for a coaching call with me. I'll walk you through whatever questions you have about Luminar Neo. And until next time, I want you to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.